Hello and welcome to the Tom's Hardware Show. I'm your host Sharon Harding, and today we're discussing our reviews of the Alienware M15 Ryzen Edition gaming laptop, Intel's 10nm i9-11980HK, and taking a sneak peek at the Dell XPS 13's new OLED screen. So yes, we are live, everybody. That's why I'm stuttering like mad. We're also taking questions from the audience as always. So if you have anything you'd like to ask us, just drop that question into the chat on Facebook or YouTube, and we'll try to discuss it on air. So joining me today is Tom's Hardware Senior Editor and Laptop Overlord, Andrew Friedman. What's up, Andrew?
That's a new title. I'm not. We might have to workshop that one. But no, I'm doing well. How are you?
Good. We also have Tom's Hardware staff writer and Tom's Hardware Show fan favorite, I've noticed, Michelle Earhart. How are you, Michelle?
Hi, Sharon. If Andrew's a laptop overlord, does that make me the laptop thane?
We'll workshop.
Like I said, we're going to
titles.
workshop all this. We're supposed to do this before the show, and
so, Michelle, you recently tested the Alienware M15 Ryzen Edition with an 8-core AMD Ryzen 7 5800H CPU, and your configuration also had an RTX 3060 graphics card and a 15.6-inch screen that can hit 165 hertz. What else can you tell us about this laptop?
Sure. So this is the laptop itself. The official name is the Alienware M15 Ryzen Edition R5. Although, if you look closely at that, I'm not sure if it's going to show up on the webcam real well. There's some detailing on the lid. There we go. That's supposed to look like a 15. It kind of looked like a 13 to me when I first opened it, which is a little disappointing. But aside from that, it's got this really slick all black exterior. I believe it does not come with a white option. So, it fits its processor. It's got light up options here and here. They're not quite turned on right now because I have an input on it in a bit, but I set them to be red to fit AMD. But more important than that is this is the first Alienware laptop since, I believe, 2007 to use an AMD CPU. Is that right, Andrew?
Yeah, it's been more than a decade. It's been almost 2 decades since they've had one. The last one was, I believe, called the ALX, and it was a very chunky laptop. And that is not the case. Why haven't they done it beforehand in between?
Yeah, why do you think now?
You'd have to go ask Alienware. I mean, for a long time, every gaming laptop was using Intel. I mean, during that time, Intel was better. I mean, Intel was clearly better, but recently AMD has caught up, and I think that's why you're seeing so many options, not just in Alienware and not just in gaming, but in productivity. Because there was a few years ago when we would get an AMD laptop in for a review, and we'd be like, "Oh, one of these. It means it's cheap. It means it's not as good." And that's no longer the case. And we're finally seeing design wins because it has the performance that people actually want it.
So we saw that a bit in the R5. This comes with the Ryzen 7 5800H chip, which is a 45-watt CPU, which is on par, at least watt-wise, with the last Alienware Intel laptop we reviewed, which is the Alienware M15 R4. That comes with a 10th gen i7. No 11th gen, though. So we compared this laptop against both that Alienware M15 R4, which is kind of interesting. It's Intel. There's not really any reason for it to be called R4, which implies that it's, worse as opposed to just different. Aside from that, it came out a few months ago, but the R6 is already announced, and that's going to be Intel only. So it seems like Alienware just swaps between different numbers for Intel and AMD now. We'll have to see how that continues, given that this is their first AMD in a while. But we also went ahead and compared it against a few other laptops with mobile RTX 3060 GPUs, which is what this Alienware has. They have 11th gen Intel Core i7s, but they are 35 watt. And against those laptops that we compared it against, the Alienware AMD laptop beat almost every laptop consistently except for that Intel Alienware laptop. On Shadow of the Tomb Raider, it came out at 73 FPS, whereas the 11th gen Intel laptops we looked at came out with like 54 and 61 FPS. Far Cry New Dawn, again, it had 79 FPS against 74 and 73 FPS. The only real competitor in gaming was that Alienware M15 R4. It depends on which game. Sometimes it was close. Shadow of the Tomb Raider, it was a difference of 77 versus 73 FPS. Far Cry New Dawn was a bit more different, 91 versus 79 FPS. But when you pay for when you go for Intel, sometimes you're going to have to pay a bit more money, which is something that's interesting to see with this laptop. This Alienware that we reviewed came in with our configuration at $1,649, which isn't cheap, but is like decently priced for an Alienware since they tend to be on the real high end. The Alienware M15 R4 that we reviewed, which is the Intel one by comparison, came in at $2,499. And this came with a pretty comparable experience, despite being so much cheaper.
Yeah, there are a couple things that it has a lower end GPU, right? This goes up to a 3070. The R4 had a 3070, so that adds to the price. The R4 comes in white. It comes in lunar light. Alienware charges for the color upgrade. They cost that in there. So, I mean, the AMD, but I mean, Michelle's right. The AMD ones have typically been a bit more affordable. But just like looking at the site now, the Ryzen Edition R5, it goes up to the i9-15900HX. It goes up to the RTX 3070, which is nice that they're not stopping at the 3060 anymore. Like, you could still spend $2,300 on this thing. So it's not like it's, a budget entry.
Yeah, for sure. I believe if I look at my review really quickly, the low end of this laptop starts at $1,567, but you can upgrade it all the way up to like $2,332. Some of those upgrades include, it's a real shame that we didn't get it on our review model, but this laptop, you can configure it with custom Cherry MX switches, like pure mechanical that Alienware made in collaboration with Cherry. It costs you about $90 extra to add that via configuration. Again, we can't really speak to it because our model did not have them, but that's
we can
pretty
speak to
cool.
Yeah. Sorry to interrupt. We could speak to it a little bit because we did see them on the R4, which our editor-in-chief, Haven Filtro, he got to test those keys and he really loved them. I do hope that we all get to try them at some point, but yeah, it is a bit much to add for keys, but maybe it's not a bit. Actually, I take that back. Mechanical keys are expensive. Maybe it's not that much to add for keys.
What do you think about?
It is interesting because kind of, Andrew, you alluded to this earlier. I think one of the things that has held or had been holding AMD mobile chips back for a while, up until maybe like a year or two ago, is that they always ended up in budget machines, even if AMD claimed they had the power to go into more powerful systems. So, you are seeing AMD chips and laptops with lesser keyboards and lesser screens, and now you're getting options with mechanical switches, and Alienware is obviously not a budget brand. So it's interesting to see it, that chip now being potentially associated with premium keyboards and, better screen.
No, it's a huge deal for them. It's taken years to really claw up to that top pantheon. I mean, I do see we have one question, which is like, how did they capture the market so fast? I mean, it wasn't so fast, right? Ryzen's been out for, thank you, Foxy Army 31, who asked, how did AMD capture the market so fast? It wasn't so fast. I mean, Ryzen came out on the desktop and was surprisingly good. That started to trickle down to laptops. And it's taken a few years, even after, you had Zen 2, and Zen 2 came and they started to make its way into laptops. So it's really now with Zen 3 that they're regularly showing up as a competitor to Intel in the gaming space on laptops anyway. So it's been a number of years. And I think like that fandom on the desktop level has definitely helped fuel it into laptops.
For sure. So definitely go to our website if you want to see Michelle's full review. But since you have the system on you right now, Michelle, one of the things you could check out actually is the webcam. So I'm gonna actually bring you over to the webcam on the Alienware system. So let's try this out.
Sure. Hi, so over to camera 2. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay, I can't hear you. 1 second. Testing. Okay, sweet. You can hear me and you can see all of my little notes and a different side of me. But this is me on the webcam for the Alienware m15 R5. I didn't love my webcam during this the review. Although looking at it now, it looks better. And I think the reason for that is that I'm not looking at it full screen right now, which is maybe okay. So a lot of webcam or laptop webcams aren't great because they're mostly made for casual use. Maybe this is the only machine you have and you're calling into, the work calls that everyone has nowadays. And for those, you're already going to be, dealing with poor compression. You're going to be dealing with, being restricted to a little box in some apps. Some apps might zoom in on you a little bit. If you're looking at me on your screen right now, you're probably going to see me full screen. I have the whole studio set up behind the scenes here, so I'm not looking at myself in full screen. You might see a little bit of artifacting, some pixelation or whatever, and that's what I didn't love about this webcam. But for casual use, it should be okay. It does capture color okay, depending on lighting. I noticed in dim lighting, this webcam was practically useless. Same if I oversaturated the lighting, so it can be a little difficult to find the perfect staging for this webcam. But right now it seems to have natural, more warm colors than the webcam I was just on, which is a 1080p Logitech C920. I've noticed with that webcam that cool colors tend to be a consistent issue with it, but it just goes to show that even when you're making compromises on fidelity, you might be making gains elsewhere.
Awesome. So I am going to put the link to Michelle's review in the chat. So if you're watching this, you can check out that review. In the meantime, I think it's time for a little chip chat. I think we need like a sound effect there. So I'm going to kick it over to Andrew. You recently tested Intel's new 10 nanometer top end Tiger Lake H mobile chip for laptops, the i9-11980HK. Before we get into your testing, can you give us a little history here, Andrew? Why is it so interesting that this is a 10 nanometer 8-core chip?
Sure. So, and this is probably the short version, but Intel had a really hard time getting past 14 nanometer. Like there were many revisions of it, and they would keep adding pluses at the end every time they refined it. And to Intel's credit, it squeezed a lot out of that process. When it got down to 10 nanometer, it never really made it into a ton of gaming laptops or a ton of workstation creative. And they actually had split last generation and 10th generation. They had split it into having a 10 nanometer ultra portable Ice Lake, and then a 14 nanometer gaming grade chip, which was Comet Lake. So this is the first time since that Intel has caught up with its 10 nanometer process that it has gone above 4 cores and put it in notebooks ready for creativity or gaming. So it's been a number of years that people have been waiting for this to see, okay, what is 10 nanometer above 8 core from Intel look like? And so that's how we got here.
Okay, and can you tell us, there we go, that's how we like it. Can you tell us a little bit about how you ended up testing this chip? So is it available on any laptops right now?
It should be available on laptops now for sale, yes. We haven't reviewed any,
okay,
but we didn't test it in a laptop that is for sale. We tested it in this Intel branded system, right? So Intel tells us it got in touch with one of its OEM partners and said, hey, we want to make reference systems. And they took it and they slapped Intel's logo on it. And I can open it up. And, it's a regular laptop, but anywhere you would expect a brand from the company that made it, there's an Intel brand. And in here is the Core i9-11980HK, their 8-core, 16-thread, top-of-the-line processor. It's a 65-watt processor, while most of the other ones start around 35. So it's their it's their most their most powerful, power consuming chip that they have. And they just tossed it in here, and we were able to test it prior to its release. So it's a little different because typically when we review systems, we take them that are for sale. So this is really more of a performance preview in that how it performed in here, it might not perform in another laptop. And that's the nature of how laptops work. You can't put them all in the same chassis and then put the same cooling on them. It's just not how it works. It's part of a system. Whereas when we do our CPU testings on desktop, we can put them in the same bench over and over again. So that's why this is more of a preview in that we're waiting to see how this chip and all of the rest of the 11th gen chips are in computers that you can actually buy, because that's really what's important. But we were able to get a pretty good preview of how this one's going to perform.
Cool. So what can you tell us about what you learned from your testing and how this chip compares to the AMD alternative?
Sure. I mean, so the answer is that based on this chip and this chip alone in, this Intel branded system, system alone, Intel is making some strides to really catch up here. It did quite well in most of the tests that we gave it. So in tests like Geekbench, which we use for productivity, and Handbrake, it was really up there. Specifically in multi-core performance, actually, on Handbrake, where it had the highest score by like 1,500 points over the next highest, which was the Ryzen 9 5900HX. And something like Handbrake, it was our fastest system by about 30 seconds. And in there, we had taken the HX out because it had a powerful GPU that might have skewed things. But from the Ryzen 7 5800H in the R5 that Michelle actually reviewed, it was a little faster there. In gaming, things were a little less interesting. See, we actually took it and we tested this one, which has an RTX 3060 in it, which I'll get to in a minute, and we compared it to other things that have a 3060. Now, obviously, the GPUs are varying now, but we took the Acer Predator Triton 300 SE, which has a Core i7 11375H, and that one is the 35-watt or H35 processor. And for most games, with the exception of Far Cry, which is a little more CPU intensive, you were within 1 or 2 frames, whether you were on this with the most powerful mobile CPU Intel has, or that 35-watt processor. And the Ryzen R5 with the 5800H was usually somewhere in between. So that was kind of interesting, but we also haven't seen it. Like, this is just an interesting choice to send out to reviewers with, right? Because the most powerful processor you have with a mid-range graphics card, like why would you do that for, why would you want to give it its first look that way, right? Why would that be the first impression?
Yeah. Well, it's interesting because I noticed that, that reference design you got, like you said, that's on a laptop for sale, but kind of meant to give everyone an idea of the kind of machines you'll see this chip in. And they're calling it a thin enthusiast market, which is interesting to me. Yeah. Yeah. What do you think about that?
You see, this system is not very thick. It's not a huge honking gaming system. And what was interesting about this one is that we couldn't compare it on like a RTX 3080 level. So we had to bring everything down to the level of other really thin machines. It seems that Intel's view is that they're going to be able to create, by having laptops that start at 35 watts with variable levels of power consumption, a wider range of laptops that start from like your normal sort of mid-range one to a thin enthusiast laptop like this one that is made of premium materials but isn't really big, to those Halo machines that are like thicker and heavier and have more fans in them. And that's really, I guess, what I was personally hoping to see as an enthusiast was that Halo machine with the thick ones with more fans that can go up to a 3080. Mm-hmm. So that's something we're going to have to see, okay, how can this push gaming? Because with the 3060, it didn't do very much. It didn't show us its limits. And the other fun thing about this is that, and we were able to open it up. In fact, I can pull up a picture real quick to show you the inside, but was that this design, and again, this is not a final design as I was told. It is largely still being, or it was still being finalized as when we got it. But the fans were Uh, uh, sorry, let me. There's the picture. Great. The fans, and you will see, there was actually 3 of them here, but they were quite loud. And there's 3 of them here, which is, I don't want to say it's abnormal, but typically we see 2 larger ones, whereas here they've put 2 on one side of the unit, 1 on the other. But the other interesting thing here is that we can't actually see a lot of the cooling. Where if you're watching this image now, it's great. And if you're listening as a podcast, then the best way I can describe it is that the motherboard is sort of in upside down from how they usually put it in. So the brackets are visible. You can see where the CPU and the GPU are, but we can't see what is, like, for instance, how many heat pipes are they using? What are the heat pipes? You couldn't do any of that unless you wanted to actually pull the motherboard out. So what it takes to cool this thing is still kind of a question. And the reason I don't even have it on right now is because those fans were running constantly when I tested it, even if I just left it like run on the Windows desktop. So this is a chip that needs adequate cooling.
What sort of noise are we looking at then?
You mean? I wish I measured it.
Like fan noise.
Yeah, it's loud enough to be annoying.
Can you reenact it? No, I'm kidding.
I can, but I won't.
I think that's maybe a mercy. The more since this has like that more powerful, power hungry chip, what kind of battery life are we looking at? When I think thin enthusiast, I think someone who probably wants a lot of battery life, really portable.
So I'll be totally frank. This isn't a system that we power tested. We had a very limited amount of time to initially test the machine, and the battery testing wasn't on there. And part of the reason was this isn't for sale. It's an Intel system. And so when we were looking at what we're going to test, we were going to test the things that we felt were most applicable towards what other systems will have. The battery life of this thing sort of isn't important because you can't buy this one, and that's going to differ tremendously based on how the battery is set up by the OEM. They all have configurable TDPs now, the size of the battery, the display that they pick. And so we will definitely find that out more. But as something in general, like gaming PCs and creator PCs, the ones that have the discrete graphics, they typically don't have the best battery lives anyway. So I wouldn't get too excited about that just because of the name of a category that Intel's trying to get going here.
Yeah, speaking of, Michelle, what do you think about this idea of the thin enthusiast market?
I don't love the name, but
a little offensive. I feel like targeted, but go on.
Yeah, I can see a point behind it. When I think there are 2 types of gamers, which is usually what I think of when I think enthusiast, but I know a lot of these laptops are aimed at productivity as well. Although this one that Andrew tested had an RTX 3060. So who knows what Intel is trying to do. When I think of gamers, there's like 2 kinds. There's the ones that really, want the top of the line hardware, want everything pushed as high as it can be. And then there's the ones like our contributor, sometimes low spec Alex, who really like to try to get as much as they can on like a small or less powerful device as possible. I think, like maybe a GPD Win 3 or, some of those Switch handhelds that are going, there is a thin enthusiast market in like trying to like squeeze things into a small form factor as possible. So I can see that being a thing.
Yeah, I don't think it's at all crazy in that it kind of already happens, right? You have things like the Razer Blade, right, which has always gone for thin and has always been extremely popular. You've noticed that Alienware's Legend design, like the one that Michelle was just showing off, has gotten much thinner and sleeker. And in fact, it just announced in it had just like teased, right, the X series when these processors came out, which looks like something that's going to be really thin. And so there is some desire for it. I guess the big question is, does the top end chip, right, the 65-watt chip, as opposed to all of the ones that are more configurable starting at 35-watt, make the most sense for it? Because maybe there's a place for it somewhere where, hey, I know I'm going to make a little bit of a sacrifice. I'm going to take the 35-watt one, but I'm going to still get the looks and the premium materials and the performance from a discrete graphics card. So there's something there, but I don't know if pairing like this top end Core i9 is the thing that makes it fit the best. So we'll see there which designs really get really popular.
Yeah, I mean, even with the same sort of specs as other laptops, thin laptops can sometimes, have struggle getting the full use out of those specs. So one of the laptops that we compared this Alienware against, the Acer Predator Triton 300 SE, I really like it. It has similar specs to another laptop we reviewed, the Asus Tough Dash 15, but it's much thinner. And so it usually had, similar specs to that Tough Dash, but occasionally it would fall maybe 10 or so FPS below in games like Grand Theft Auto 5 or Red Dead Redemption 2. But because it was so portable, I wish I had it on hand still to show you, I was okay with that. Because you're not buying that to get like the big chonky gaming PC. You're buying something to get decent gaming performance in a form factor that you can really easily slip into a backpack.
That's sort of what's interesting here, right? Is that back at CES, Intel had announced what it was calling H35, and those were slightly lower power processors for these really small gaming machines. And then we thought we were getting H45, the rest of the Tiger Lake H series, but it's H45 isn't really a thing in that besides the 65 watt one, everything else is starting at 35 watt and going up to 65 watt. So they're going to be really configurable, which means you're going to have to pay close attention to see what the laptop vendor has chosen to clock it at, as well as, I guess, whatever cooling solutions it's using, however it can afford to keep it cool. Because that I think will have a lot to do in what size chassis they put it in, as well as, I guess, if you get a bigger chassis, you can also fit bigger fans and run it harder that way. So I think what size chassis it in and that configurability will really go hand in hand in deciding, okay, what kind of different chassis can we make, what different designs can we make, and who can we approach? Like, can we make something specifically for creators, or can we make something thin just for gamers, and see if that really catches on, or if people just still want the top of the line stuff. But I have a feeling there's something in there for a little bit of everybody, just because we've seen that already for years.
Great. So if you have any questions on this, definitely drop them into the chat and we'll try to discuss it. I see Nyan is asking about the laptops, Andrew. Maybe you can clarify again about availability of this chip. And they're also asking for benchmarks. So I am going to share a link to Andrew's article in the chat right now, so you can check out his benchmarks that he did. But can you again just explain the availability of the chip? Because we didn't test it in a laptop that is available. We use a test system, but can you buy a laptop with this chip right now?
So if I understand correctly, so when this went live was when companies were allowed to start selling laptops with these processors in there. Now, obviously, there is another factor in the world going on, which is a massive component shortage. And while I'm not sure that's affected Intel as much because they make a lot of their own chips, laptops have a ton of components in them. So that may make it slower in general, along with everything else going on from the pandemic, for things to ship. But they are starting to ship out now. So you should be able to go and find a couple of these that are on sale. And we expect to have reviews of a handful of them coming soon.
Awesome. That's why you got to keep it locked onto our site, tomshardware.com, if you didn't know. So yeah, if you have more questions on that chip or also on Michelle's Alienware laptop, keep them coming. And in the meantime, as always, or as often, I like to give you guys a little preview of what's in the lab here, as the graphic states. So
that one also needs a sound.
Maybe I'll get yeah, exactly.
Maybe some like hammering or something with our nice little branded tools.
Yeah, I like the ideas. If you have any ideas on the sound effects you should be using, also drop those in the comments. So actually just yesterday, this is fresh in the lab, I received the Dell XPS 13 with an OLED screen. So just to be clear, this is not a brand new system. I actually reviewed the latest Dell XPS 13 with Intel Tiger Lake chips late last year, but now you can opt to buy it with an OLED touch screen. So let me try to bring that up for you all real quick. So give me one moment. Let's open it up. give you
Sharon
guys.
just flexing with her interior design.
So here's a look. So keep in mind, we're on a webcam, of course. This isn't going to give you the full scale of what the OLED will look like. It actually looks pretty good for webcam, coming through a webcam. So opting for the OLED option nets you a 3456 by 2160 resolution OLED touchscreen. So again, this is 16 by 10 aspect ratio. So that's why the resolution is a little different than the 16:9 resolutions that are more common. So Dell is calling that 3.5K resolution. And so note that this is actually going to cost you the same amount as a 4K, so to speak, option. So that's something you'll have to weigh, the pros and cons of if you want sharper resolution or the contrast and color coverage that this OLED claims. So here I'm just taking you through, some photos on our website to give you an idea of, what it could look like. So the OLED screen here is, according to Dell, it's supposed to cover 100% of the DCI-P3 color space, which is definitely something we'll be testing. The non-OLED version of this laptop that I reviewed covered about 69% of that color space. So that would be quite a boost. Which actually brings me to a question I have for you guys. In terms of, are you seeing a lot of 100% coverage of DCI P3 in laptops lately? Because when it comes to like premium gaming monitors, which is mostly what I'm looking at, it's 80% of DCI P3 is pretty good. The best we've seen is 112%. So are you guys seeing a lot of 100% DCI P3 coverage in laptops you've reviewed lately?
No. The OLED
ahead.
ones are, I was just say the OLED ones are the big exception where they may hit that. For a while we weren't even on DCI-P3. We were looking at sRGB, and those in recent years have gotten really good, right? And they've surpassed 100%. So now we've started relying on DCI-P3, and they don't hit 100% except for some of the OLED ones. Those ones will come a lot closer. So you see something like the HP Spectre X36014 came really close. I don't have the number off the top of my head. And, but that's also for a certain person, right? You have to want an OLED screen, the details it brings, the vivid picture it brings, but also the battery life hit it tends to bring.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. So again, those are things we'll be testing as well. Another thing about the OLED screen is it's supposed to, according to Dell, hit 400 nits brightness. So the non-OLED version I tested actually hit 469 nits. So 69 nits brighter. So that's a little bit of a hit, but I don't think that's going to be hugely noticeable in, typical use. So that'll also be something I'll be looking at. So yesterday I did actually get to use the screen a bit. It was about 90 degrees here. So it was really sunny in New York, and I was able to work outside with the laptop with the sun to my back, and there was shadow. You could see like the shadow of my head on the screen, and there was some glare at the top border where I had dark Chrome tabs, and I was getting some glare in my eyes, but I was still able to get a lot of work done, surf the web, work in documents and those things without straining too much, which isn't something I can do on most laptops on a really sunny day. So I'll still want to look at, some movies, HDR movies particularly. I have Mission Impossible Fallout and Black Panther in HDR waiting for their millionth views. But if you have anything else you want me to check out on the screen, definitely let me know. But first, I'll kick it over to Andrew and Michelle. What are your thoughts so far? I guess I should mention price as well. So this is $1,650 or $1,700 if you opt for the white version that I was just showing, which is again the same price as the higher resolution 4K one.
For an OLED?
Yes.
And what is Dell calling the resolution for this one?
3.5K.
3.5K.
It's literally 3456 by 2160. Traditional 4K is 3840 by 2160. But again, that would be a 16 to 9 aspect ratio. This is a taller 16 to 10 screen. So, I mean, you guys test a lot of premium ultra portables. What's your take on, OLED and maybe that? I mean, I don't want to call it a price premium. It's kind of just another option, right?
Yeah, I think it's interesting because, and this may be unpopular, but I know I've heard from a number of people who feel this way, is that on a 13-inch screen, excuse me, on a 13-inch screen, are you going to get the benefit of 4K? Like, is it even going to matter to to a pair of human eyes? OLED is something that basically anyone will notice, right? And there have been a handful of 1080p OLED screens, but not a lot of them. Most of them have been 4K. So my guess would be that if you're someone who's not, working in applications like certain creative applications that maybe 4K will give you a big benefit from, you'll definitely probably notice the OLED more so. But I think that's definitely a preference. If you're someone who likes the deeper blacks and the vivid colors, but doesn't mind the likely battery life hit, and I'm really curious to see that battery life number because the XPS 13 has typically been quite good on battery, then maybe it'll be worth it for you. But I don't know, and I don't know if 3.5K is going to necessarily be any more useful or different on that size laptop unless you're using some like creative applications that measure down to the pixel.
Yeah, what I'm really excited about here, I guess, is the greater variety of options. Pretty much any of the OLED laptops that I've reviewed have been 4K, and the combination of 4K and OLED usually pushes the price up super high. So hearing, a $1,700 laptop, obviously the other specs on that laptop will, and the configuration you opt for will adjust that price. But being able to go that low in price and still have an OLED screen really seems like it widens the, accessibility to OLED that most people have. And yeah, I'm not a huge 4K person. I have some colleagues who swear by it just because, it gives them more space to work with. And so that gives them more productivity capability. But I do notice, like, when a screen is VA or TN or IPS or OLED, pretty much instantly. So, I'm curious. I'd love to see wider adoption of OLED across different resolutions. And this seems like a good step for me.
Yeah, I will say, again, I haven't even had maybe just about a full day with the machine. And so I've mostly been working on it, but I have already noticed, a little bit more pop in the screen, like even simple things like my Slack icon at the bottom, the notification that I have a new message is like a popping more, a greater red, like it stands out to me more. And things that I look at typically, like the Tom's Hardware website, seems to just have a little bit more like oomph to it. So we'll love to see the numbers once we run it through the testing, but it was noticeable. Like I did feel like I had at least a more colorful and vibrant screen than I did testing the non-OLED version of this laptop. I should also add that this version, in terms of pricing that I shared with you, that is only with a 512 gigabyte SSD and 16 gigs of RAM. If you want to go up to 1 terabyte, you have to add $150 to the price. And if you want 2 terabytes, you add $450, which does not make sense mathematically. Maybe, prices can change, so maybe that'll change eventually, but that gives you a little bit more info on the pricing. So we do have a question from Gabriel F., who I think I saw earlier is tuning in from Brazil. So thank you so much. What did you think of the keyboard on this laptop? So like I mentioned, I did technically review, this system with a different screen and the same keyboard. So you can check out the Dell XPS 13 review with Tiger Lake on the website. But generally, it's better than expected. This is a thin laptop, and often you get like those smushy, really thin keys. There is a decent amount of travel here, and it's actually pretty comfy. However, the keys are pretty flat. I personally like when there's like some grooves for like your fingers to rest a little bit. And another thing that strikes me is in the white version, at least, when you add the backlight, it's a white backlight, and that makes it actually pretty hard to see the writing on the key. So I would actually opt to turn the backlight off because the writing was more visible, but that's going to be a problem, if you prefer backlights, if you're working in dark environment, things like that. So yeah, thank you for that question. Let's see what else we have. A question on the Intel chip for you, Andrew. Does this new Core i9-11980HK have a lot of thermal throttling because of Intel thermal velocity boost? Did you notice anything like that, Andrew?
So Yes, actually. I couldn't tell you if it's specifically because of velocity boost, but we run this one test really on all of our laptops in which we take Cinebench R23 and we loop one run of it 20 times. And this actually had some pretty high scores, typically like around 11,000. But looking at the report afterwards, and we like to use a pretty popular tool called HW Info. It reported, I don't want to say constant, but fairly frequent thermal. I can say this, thermal throttling. You know, it's two words that they have the same sound. Thermal throttling.
3 times fast. Thermal throttling.
Thermal throttling. I can do it. So it was pretty frequent. Now, I couldn't tell you, is that because of something like velocity boost, or is that because of the cooling that's on here? Is it because it's in such a thin system? Would it be better in a thicker system with beefier cooling? I don't know. But off of this one particular, Intel branded laptop, yes, the chip gets hot, and yes, it throttled.
Thank you, Andrew. I'm just running through here to see if we have any more questions. I do see some comments on the Intel AMD battle. That'll definitely be something to keep, our eyes on in the coming months and for our lives, I guess, because I think we're in this for the long haul, you guys. So again,
it's a good thing.
Yeah, for sure. So I will, again, keep your eyes on this site. I'll be testing the OLED screen. I just shared the link to the review of the Dell XPS 13 in general, the non-OLED screen, which is also available now as well. And in the meantime, I guess I'll say thank you to everyone who's been watching. Don't forget to like us on Facebook and YouTube and Twitch and just everywhere you see us, just like us so you don't miss any of the fun. And remember, you can also download every episode of the Tom's Hardware Show as a podcast. So thanks to Michelle Earhart and Andrew Friedman. Their articles are already on the site, and I've shared them in the chat. So check those out for an in-depth look. And that is our show. We'll see you next Thursday.
Thanks, everyone.